my goal was with drinking was to kind of black out a second before my head hit the pillow so that I did never have to be alone with myself. It was my worst fear. First step, we admitted powerlessness over alcohol. And I thought, oh, I can't go to AA because I still have a little bit of power. Like I know there's a point in my day where I'm deciding to drink. So I guess I'm not powerless. And in my head, that felt like reason. It felt like logic. And I was afraid to go to AA wrongly, but at the time I was afraid to go because I thought someone might tell me, you're not bad enough to be here. When you quit, every time you want a drink, what you're really asking yourself is for comfort. So if you can invent 10 other comforts to offer yourself, because you've just got blinders on, you've just trained yourself that there's only one thing you want, which is alcohol. So if you can think of other ways to offer comfort, then that you have an arsenal, For the longest time when I was out for walks, and my dad would come to mind, I would actually swear at him and say, get the F away from me right now. I don't want to think about you. I'm enjoying my walk. You don't get to come on this walk with me. I'm still mad at you. At some point, I could say, okay, you get 5 minutes. I'm going to listen to you. And so I don't think that I don't have a belief system that makes me feel like he's with me and this is an actual conversation. To me, this is healing that's taking place in my mind and my heart. But some people, their belief system might be that is a real conversation. So respectfully for whatever people believe, I think it allows me to show up in that relationship. And so even though I didn't get what I wanted in terms of healing that relationship before he died, I have had some healing and expect it to continue to heal. I have room, I have capacity for continued healing. And to me, that's one more reason to stay sober, is so that we can keep growing and healing in this way.
Hey, sober people and sober adjacent people. Welcome to I Have 12 Questions. I'm Amanda Patton, your host, a leading expert on nothing. However, I am in recovery and I love it so much so that I launched this podcast where we get to talk to people who are trudging the road to happy freaking destiny across all the different ways that people get there. So while this is definitely through the lens of recovery and sobriety, these stories and the themes that we'll be covering are universally human. So love, loss, grief, excitement, parenting, outside issues, purpose, God stuff, whatever. In the words of the great Ted Lasso by way of Walt Whitman, I want to be curious, not judgmental. So like I said, we'll be talking to people in recovery. We're going to be talking to experts and practitioners who help those people along their path in recovery. And we're just really excited to hear people tell their stories and to be inspired by them and to create a community of support for everybody in recovery and people who know and love people who struggle with addiction issues and whatnot. So anyways, we're so glad you're here and thanks for listening. Hey listeners, just a quick disclaimer before we get into the interview. The views and opinions expressed by those interviewed on I Have 12 Questions or myself are just opinions and our own personal experiences. We are not doctors or therapists or psychiatrists. So none of the recommendations or opinions expressed should be considered medical or psychological advice. There may be adult language contained in some of these episodes, as well as triggers around conversations regarding rape, sexual abuse, drug and alcohol usage, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and many other topics that will come up when we are discussing addiction and recovery from addiction. So please use discretion. This podcast is not for everybody. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. So before I get started, let me just say that I literally cannot believe who our guest is today. I can't believe it. I always say I'm the luckiest person I know. But she started the Unpickled Blog in 2011 to anonymously document her own journey of becoming alcohol-free. And nowadays she recovers out loud and on camera in the hopes of inspiring still more people who may want to also live an alcohol-free life. She's the author of several books, notably Take Good Care, Unpickled, Prepare to be Alcohol-Free, the book, and The Ember Ever There. And she's a musician and a bunch of other stuff. She's been a trailblazer in the alcohol-free community for years, and her contributions have helped people who are, all over the spectrum of, how our relationship is with alcohol, from alcoholics, addicts at rock bottom to people who are sober curious, maybe to people who are just tired of their attachment to alcohol. And so the Bubble Hour podcast is very well known in the recovery community and loved in the sober community. And she joined the show as co-host in season 2 and became the sole host and producer in season 5. And it just wrapped up its 10th season. So I've been clean and sober about the exact same amount of time that the podcast has been out. And this podcast has saved my ass. I cannot even tell you guys how many times these conversations have reminded me of my why. And also the diversity of her guests and their approaches to being alcohol free has appealed to me, and it's kept it fresh. But it also showed me how sobriety, obviously it has to do with drinking, but it has to do with so much more than that, about our intentionality. And so the tools that we have to actually apply to live an alcohol-free life, and keep, maintaining that, are covered in her podcast and her blog and her book so beautifully. So that was a lot, but it's because she is doing and has done a lot. So Jean McCarthy, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Longest intro ever. Sorry. There's so much. So, okay, I have to have an icebreaker question, as you know. So if your life had a theme song, what would it be?
So I was thinking about this, and I was concocting in my head some kind of like remix of Ricky Lee Jones and Taylor Swift and Cake, and then I thought, wait a minute, I actually wrote the theme songs for my life because I have 2 albums, so maybe I should choose something of my own. The theme music from the Bubble Hour is called I Own It, and that's a song that I wrote and recorded in 2008. When I was in active addiction. And so it's like a recovery anthem, but I didn't even know that I needed at the time. It was about just kind of owning my junk. And when I got sober and then listened to that song again, I realized, oh, this really has, this has new meaning for me now. And then there's another song I wrote. I have an album from 2007. There's a song on there called Grace. And it is about just the idea of like, sometimes we want to do the right thing and you just need a little grace, like a little nudge from the universe to get you over the hump and get you started. And that song still just speaks to my heart because as it turned out, those were things that unfolded in my life. And so it was almost kind of predictive, maybe the way I wrote them and what they came to mean to me over time.
That's wild. They were prophetic. I didn't know that they were written during active addiction, because I know that song plays at the beginning of every show, so I feel like I know it by heart at this point. Well, I want to start by reading from one of your books, and it's Unpickled, Prepare to be Alcohol-Free. And you say that it was initially meant to be a short-term tool for accountability. Well, that was the blog, Unpickled. And it grew into this worldwide hub of support. And so like when I was reading through your book, there's a lot of like very practical things that I wish somebody would have told me this stuff. I wish somebody would have said these things to me early on. But in the book, you just come right out of the gate with, I love the introduction. I just love the whole thing. I've read through it a couple times now, but it's find your why words. And you encourage your readers to find your why words to kind of reframe their reasons. And in yours, you talk about authenticity being one of your why words. And I'm wondering kind of just, can you tell us about that? Why authenticity? Why is that it for you? Or why was that one of the things initially?
It's funny how that idea of authenticity hasn't wavered a whole lot for me over nearly 12 years. This month, it'll be 12 years that I've been sober. And I know, like, I love that. I love being able to say that. The thing is, at first I realized that I knew I wasn't being authentic, and I wanted to be more authentic, because that imposter syndrome feeling that a lot of women feel challenged by. I think I was drinking to numb the discomfort of not feeling in alignment and feeling like that I had kind of built up this public persona that was very heavy to carry. I felt like I never got to be myself, and I felt ashamed of who I really was. And then you get sober, and then you're like embarrassed that I was sober, which is kind of dumb. Now I'm proud of it, but I wasn't embarrassed to be sober. I was embarrassed that I needed to get sober, because it felt like a failure that everyone else can handle alcohol and I couldn't. And now the way I see it is a little different. I think what I understand is that the addiction to alcohol, the dependence on alcohol, was really a symptom of the inauthenticity. And sobriety is when we put down our addiction, whatever it is. Recovery is when we heal the reasons behind it. And so when I quit drinking, when I got sober, it gave me space to heal what needed healing. And for me, that was becoming authentic and becoming really integrated and aligned, and feeling that I always am, or as much as I possibly can be, I am authentically me, and I'm not changing masks depending on who I'm sitting in front of.
Wow. Sobriety is when we put down the thing, and recovery is when we heal the reason. That's huge. That gave me chills. Okay. So my second question, it's just, yes. The second thing I want to ask you about. So on page 7, wow, I'm turning into my mother where I have to do this thing.
I have to wear readers to do on-camera interviews, because even from here, I can't, see the screen. I have contacts where I can see further away, but not. Yes, it's very. It's a lot. You're entering into that stage.
Yeah, fun times. On page 7, you talk about labels, and I thought this was just, and you talk about it a lot on your show too. I mean, there are very specific conversations around people's different experiences with different words and the semantics and the language. And it's fascinating. Human nature is fascinating. And so you're talking about how, we're accustomed to hearing the words alcoholic, sober, addiction in hushed tones, right? There's this like stigma or shame or secrecy about it. Cause like you were saying, you feel embarrassed. Like, I should be able to handle that. I'm a very smart, accomplished person. Why can't I? That type of stuff. And then you kind of talk a little bit about the differences of the words and maybe what they mean. And part of me, when I was reading this, felt a little bit defensive of AA dogma, just because that's the world I come from, right? And it's like, no, you have to say, like, I'm Amanda, I'm an alcoholic, like, never forget what you are and who you are. It's very, very much tied into like your identity. So part of me was like, wait a second. And then the other part of me felt so encouraged by how we get to call it whatever we want,
Yeah.
And also on page 25, which I feel like is related to this exact same thing, because again, it's semantics, but it's powered versus empowered. Sorry, powerless versus empowered. And it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, just because I'm scared to think that I'm in control of anything. Because then what if my will comes back and I start strong arming situations, or I think I can control my drinking again? And because I've been conditioned to believe that that's very dangerous for me. However, empowerment just means that I do make these choices, right? And that's kind of what you go into, where you're saying it's possible to be physically addicted to alcohol and still retain a feeling of empowerment. Right? That these things can coexist. and it illuminated for me my black and white thinking, right? It's you're either all this or all that. Well, that's not true. That's not right, right? These things can be coexisting. So my question to you is, what is your experience with how the language and semantics around all of this encourages or limits people's ability to live an alcohol-free life? Because you've been doing this for a long time. So I'm sure you have really good insights.
Yeah. And my brain used language to keep me drinking for a long time. Mm-hmm. So, this book is called Prepare to Be Alcohol Free. So it's about things you can be thinking about before you quit to help remove some of the roadblocks that are either going to potentially trip you up in your early recovery or prevent you from quitting. So the reason I want people to think about language is because it's one of those things that our addiction leverages to keep us drinking. And for me, that meant when I thought, I know I have a problem with alcohol. I wonder if I should go to AA. So then I'm like, well, what are those 12 steps? So I looked them up. First step, we admitted powerlessness over alcohol. And I thought, I can't go to AA because I still have a little bit of power. Like I know there's a point in my day where I'm deciding to drink. So I guess I'm not powerless, and in my head that felt like reason. It felt like logic. And I was afraid to go to AA wrongly, but at the time I was afraid to go because I thought someone might tell me, you're not bad enough to be here. You're not powerless. You're not, because I also your brain just plays so many tricks on itself. So and on the one hand, I kind of thought I was better than your average alcoholic, whatever that was, because I was misusing the label of alcoholic as kind of a generic phrase to mean not me. So, right. Right? Yeah, like, I don't know what I am, but that's those other people, whoever they are, that are worse than me.
Right.
And I also kind of had it as like a destination that I needed to hit before I could quit. Like I kind of felt like it was a diagnosis that I had to hit before I could quit. None of those things are right. Those are all mind games I was playing on myself. Those were word games my addicted brain was dancing around to justify drinking. And when we're in that contemplative stage, like when we're kind of starting to think about quitting, but we're not there yet, that's when I really aimed this book for, is for people who are thinking about quitting or in the early stages of quitting. It's a time when we're really in denial and really kind of blocked off from ourselves. Going back to authenticity, right? We're being kind of inauthentic. Help me. Inauthentic. There we go.
Inauthentic. Yeah. I was like, hold on.
And we're kind of we're blinding ourselves to our own truths, because alcohol does that. It numbs us to truth, but also becomes very painful to look inside. And for me anyway, that was something I was really drinking to avoid. I didn't want to lay my head down at the end of the day and be alone with my thoughts. I stayed busy all day so that I didn't have to be alone with myself. And at some point I had to go to sleep, and you busy. And then you go to bed, and then I would lay there and torture myself by thinking about how awful I was. So drinking helped me try to bypass that time of day. If I did it right, what my goal was with drinking was to kind of black out a second before my head hit the pillow so that I did never have to be alone with myself. It was my worst fear. And so this book really is an invitation to gently bring you back to yourself and become honest with yourself about the words you're using, about the words you're afraid of, about the way your mind plays with words to kind of trick you. And powerless or not powerful, the whole point is it's okay to choose that. And if you're in a program that says, this is how we use the language here, this is what it means in this room, then you go into that program agreeing, this is how I'm going to apply the language. But if you're like me and saying, oh, I'm going to try maybe to do this without a program, then that's okay if you want to try that. But decide mindfully, thoughtfully, what is the language? What do you want? And if you think, I don't want to be sober, I don't want to say I'm sober, fine. Say you're alcohol free, say you're a non-drinker. What are the parameters you want to put around this? And I think the point really throughout this book is just that invitation to look inside and think about things for yourself, and then remember what you've decided, so that if something does start to go wrong or wobble or not feel quite right, you can go back to that decision and say, maybe I need to reconsider this. Maybe this label that I chose, I've got more information now. Maybe I feel differently about it, Right. So powerlessness versus empowered. Smart recovery takes that empowered approach where it says, you can do something, you don't have to wait until you feel powerless.
Right.
Be empowered by breaking up with booze now. Be empowered by becoming a non-drinker. The perspective from AA is saying it's kind of just the other side of the same coin. We were powerless over alcohol. Like, I'm addicted to alcohol. I can't fix that. That's a brain change that is, not really reversible. So It's kind of just a different way of looking at the same thing. If the language is keeping you from quitting drinking, adapt the language, because the important thing is to take control of your relationship with alcohol in whatever way works for you.
I love that so much. It's so true. It's so spacious. And even in AA meetings, secular, traditional, whatever, I hear people all the time, they don't even identify anymore as alcoholic. Say I'm a person in recovery, or I'm, so even in that environment, there's got to be that flexibility. And I like how you break it out in the book, talking about colloquialisms versus medical terms versus alternatives. And a lot of people use all of those interchangeably. Which is fine, right? But they don't really mean the same thing technically, or maybe they do, depending on who you're around. And I usually just say things like I'm in recovery, but then sometimes I don't want people to ask me questions, so I just say I don't drink. And early on, it was, I'm on an antibiotic, or I'm preparing for a race. I'm eating really clean and not drinking right now. It was all these things, and then eventually I was just like, I don't drink.
It's easy. But if you're around a bunch of people, say in a 12-step environment, I say, hi, I'm Jean, I'm an alcoholic, when I'm with my AA friends, because I know what that means to them. But if I said that at a family reunion, well, they don't know what that means. They're like, I don't know. Are you active? Are you in trouble? Are you okay? Are you on a day pass from rehab? They don't understand how that term is used. So context is everything.
Context is everything. So on page 4, I believe it is. Let me go back and make sure I've got this whole book marked up. Talking about patterns, and this is huge. And again, I wish I had had this book, either before I got sober or while I was getting sober. AA does have something called Living Sober, and it's just sort of a more practical, but it's nothing like this. This is like, I love plans and I love checklists. And that's what this is, but you're saying this is, I didn't do this. I wasn't asked to do this, but I love the suggestions you make of taking a pen to paper and even a color-coded calendar to make things real, because in our minds, they make perfect sense. Everything makes great sense in my head until I put a pen to paper or I talk to someone else about it. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Am I even being honest with myself? And also understanding how alcohol becomes such an ingrained ritual just because it's the end of the workday, or just because it's, Saturday lunchtime with your friends or whatever. Are you wanting or needing to drink at that moment? No, but it's what we do. And so it becomes that. And then eventually some people do get dependent chemically, bodily on it, or they associate that with fun. And so there's all these things that our minds will do, like you said. And the social anxiety, personal conflict, loneliness, like it's just so crazy, all the patterns and the things that you bring up, to just make sure that we're being honest with ourselves and asking ourselves questions. Because these aren't big, abstract, theoretical things. These are like, this is what we do on a daily basis. This is real life. And so it just feels very applicable. It feels doable because it's real and it's relatable. So, my question here is, since you stopped drinking, did you see other patterns pop up in your life similar? And did you use your same system maybe on other patterns? I can't think of an example, but have you seen that? Because for me, when I stopped drinking, other things morphed, and it was like whack-a-mole. It was like all these other things were popping up. But I could see using this system and applying it to pretty much anything.
Yeah. I think that it's part of, again, it kind of comes back to that recovery process. And it's something I learned really through therapy, was that I just thought, if I thought something, it was true. If I felt something, it was real. If I did something, it was justified. And instead, to kind of realize that as humans, we all have these predictable patterns, and that if I look for patterns, I can see where I maybe am doing something that's not specifically horrible to me, but predictably human response to being uncomfortable or to being, just some part of the human experience. So I'll give you an example, because this is a great example. I realized that my husband used to go on this big golf trip every year. And it was right around the time when the big Black Thursday, is that what it is? Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales were on. And I would be home alone, and I was sober, but I would order all this stuff online. And then he'd get back from his trip, and I would be really embarrassed as all these packages were arriving, and I wouldn't even remember having bought them. And I remember doing it, I remember kind of spotting this pattern that, hey, you know what I'm doing? I'm consoling my, not just loneliness, but kind of maybe a resentment that he was away on a trip by shopping online. And because I was doing it alone at home, I felt unseen. And one thing I've learned about myself was that because I really wasn't authentic and didn't value myself a whole lot, I had this idea. This was mind blowing for me when I realized it, but I had this idea that if nobody saw, then it wasn't real, Yep. So because I didn't value myself, so I didn't consider that I saw it. Like if you saw me do something, right? If you saw it, then I would be embarrassed. But if I saw myself do it, who cares what I think? I'm a nobody. So as I've come to feel more connected to myself and come to value me as a human and forgive myself for being human, I have started to hold myself accountable for the things that even only I know. And that was huge. So that's a kind of pattern that I realized. I also saw a pattern when it came to trouble with friends. I remember having these kind of friend breakups, I guess you would say, with other women, like in my 30s. And I felt like, wow, I've really had a string of bad luck with people that I've trusted. And then right away thought, well, wait a minute, who's the common denominator in this problem? It's me. So, maybe this is my pattern, not a series of bad luck events. And that comes back to step work, right? That's one of the processes that happens in a 12-step program, where you look at what's my role in things. And, that's a really brilliant process too. So yeah, I think documenting patterns is so helpful. And when it comes to alcohol or anything we're doing in an addictive pattern, we're in quite an emotional relationship with that behavior. And so this book, again, this process is a way to take a step back and become really clinical with it and become really objective. And I feel like it helps us come more in alignment with reality when we're a little less emotional and a little more real and honest with ourselves.
That's huge. I mean, that's huge. And it's like I can only speak for myself. My mind will do anything to justify and protect a habit that I am using to comfort myself.
Yeah.
Anything. And it makes perfect sense to me because it's my own brain coming up with it. So of course, but like you're saying, if you get out of that, whatever that is, and you put a pen to paper and you start really tracking to where you can zoom out and look at it and say, but I would never think of that because I always thought I would just figure it out with my own brain, that desperately wanted me to keep drinking or keep shopping or, or patterns in relationships. Like, oh, wow, I'm the one person who's consistently been here through all these relationships.
Also the one person I have control over. So
the one person. Yeah. And like, yes, that's just, man, that's profound. Okay. So psychology, it's human nature to lose perspective on our habits. And you say that we often rationalize potentially harmful routines by downplaying the risk, of course. This is a recurring theme throughout the stories I've heard in your show, whether they were authors or people telling their own personal stories and just all across the board. Or, AA, obviously. And that's just that is a very recurring theme of like, you just don't think it's that bad. Right. Yeah. And you also talk about, how people, I don't know, surround themselves with other people or to where your life starts to be arranged around certain patterns or behaviors, maybe not intentionally, but it just sort of ends up that way over time.
Right. Like if you want to be drinking all the time, you're not going to be hanging out with non-drinkers.
Nope.
You start to self-select people that are either like you or worse than you so that you can justify your behavior and maybe even hide your behavior a little bit. And we sort of slide into it. And then we think, well, all my friends drink. Well, yeah, because they're the only ones who call.
Well, and I love the fact that you even break it down into, I love logic, sometimes it's not my friend because I can use logic to stay out of my heart space. And that's something that I always have to work on. But when it comes down to this, you're literally listing out ounces and measuring and like put your normal pour into a glass and go look at what a glass of wine means to you versus, right. So I'm talking about the psychology and the friends and just the habits and everything like that. But, a lot of times we can't see ourselves, which is why community is such a crucial part of sobriety. However you do it, or an alcohol-free lifestyle, just some system of support, community, accountability, the ability to show up for other people, all of that stuff. And so my question to you is, do you have support in your life? The answer has to be yes, but I want to hear about it. Do you have support in your life because you give so much support to so many others? A lot of times caretakers, maybe they don't have anybody because people are always coming to you for advice. So who's your support? What does that look like in your recovery or in your alcohol-free life?
It's morphed over the years. The first 2 years I was sober, I only used online support because I was anonymous. I wrote my blog anonymously at first. Yeah. And little by little, like I added my first name and then I added my photo. And then I kind of realized, the people that I do business with in my community aren't reading this. Only people that are searching sober blogs are finding me. So I got more and more brave about coming out. But at first it was just the blogosphere because, 12 years ago, blogging was more the thing. And there was a lot of communication through the comments and stuff. So that was really quite lovely. But something interesting happened. When I was 6 months sober, I was at a conference for my industry, which was home building. And one of the speakers who was talking about technology, I was at a presentation and this kind of quasi-Canadian tech celebrity was doing a talk. And he happened to mention that he was sober, like just in passing in his presentation. And so I'm sitting with all my peers in the audience in a breakout room at a conference. And I'm just like so excited because I'm in the room with another sober person. Now, statistically, at this conference of a couple thousand people, there was probably, I don't know, statistically 100, 200 people, maybe, I don't know. For sure, there was a few. No, there should have been maybe 20 or something, right? But here I knew I was in the room with someone who was sober. And I had this idea of like, I'm going to go and tell him after. I'm just going to go and tell him I'm sober too. And that I think had just been my 6 months, or somehow I was like, this is my little 6-month gift to myself, is that I'm going to tell this guy that I'm sober. And I'd never told another person except, just family members, friends, very few people knew. Wow. So, I did. I went up to him afterwards, and after everyone left the room, and I did this little like, hi, I'm Jean, and I loved your talk. And I just wanted to tell you that I'm sober too. I'm just like 6 months. I just had my 6 months. And this guy, okay, this surprised me, but it won't surprise you. He went, oh my God. And he like threw his arms open and he gave me a hug and he said, 6 months is huge. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you. And like, I was just delighted and so taken aback in the most pleasant way. And it made me realize this is why people go to meetings. This is why community is so helpful. I definitely got that online dopamine hit from people commenting on my blog and from that exchange. That was helpful. But I realized that there was something transcendent about human to human contact. And that carried me forward. And I, from that moment, knew I want some sober friends. I don't know how to get them. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I want this, and I'm going to try to find this in my life. And so and little by little I have. And so at first it was reaching out online, and I would actually drive to another town to meet people. If I hadn't have been so scared to go to an AA meeting in my own community, I would have found out to my delight that happens in those rooms quite effortlessly, and it's not scary. Mm-hmm. And, I kind of thought I was too big of a deal. Like I thought, everybody's going to know it's me. And when I did finally go to an AA meeting in my community, like nobody knew or cared who I was. They were just thought I was there. They didn't care who I thought I was. They cared who I really was, right. Which is even better. So yes, I have in-person support in my community. I actually go to a women's 12-step group. And on the first day I went in and said, listen, I've been sober for a long time, many years, not using this program, but I want friends. Is it okay for me to sit at your table? Am I welcome here if I'm not, super invested in this program or walking this path? And they were like, yes, it's take what you can use and leave the rest. If fellowship is the only thing you want to use, you're welcome to come and use that. Yes. You're here because you want to be a non-drinker, and we all get what that's like. So that has been great. They are such lovely women, such great friends, and I adore that. And then I have lots of friends that I've met literally around the world, Amanda, from blogging and podcasting. And when I've traveled, I've posted, hey, I'm going to be in Italy on vacation. Anyone in Italy? And then a listener messaged me and said, yeah, I'm in Italy. I'll meet you for coffee in Rome when you're here. And
I heard that. I think I heard you talk about that on one of the episodes, the farewell, as you were going through. And
it was incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Across the world.
Yeah. And so I've met people all over the world I'm not a global traveler, but really when I do travel, I can always connect with people. And you don't have to be a blogger or a podcaster to do this. You can always go to a recovery meeting of any stripe and just say, I'm from out of town, and I might not be part of this program, but I'm visiting your community, and I just want to connect with other people that are, on this path. And that's always available. It's really a surprisingly welcome community. I did not realize that when I quit drinking. I had no idea. But a lot of us find that helping others helps us stay on our path. It is one of the steps in a 12-step program. But even for people that aren't in that program, just helping others helps you and feels good and is lovely. So it really is such a nice community.
Yeah, it really is. And it's so welcoming. And we are uniquely qualified not only to understand other non-drinkers, but to hopefully be helpful. And a lot of us, a lot of us feel judged or misunderstood by society because they look at you and go, and if you had a really high bottom, maybe your life never got like that. But for a lot of us who were arrested and literally destroying our lives in front of our families and people who knew us to be very capable at work, or, they don't get it. They love you. They want you to get better. They want to help, but they don't understand. I didn't understand myself. It's confusing. Why can't I figure this out? And then you walk into a room of people or a society of people who are like, yeah, me too. And then you're like, okay, this feels good. And people love you immediately just because they identify.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing.
And I have to do the caveat of saying, if you are meeting people online, do all the safety things, right? Meet in public. You're good. And not everyone at a recovery meeting is going to be healthy. They're not all necessarily going to be in a healed stage of sobriety or recovery. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to be friends, you're going to like them, whatever. But generally speaking, it's a welcoming community. And I've always just meet in public, meet for coffee, meet a few people. It's incredible and helpful and fun.
I was going to say that too, though, of even over the years of going to AA meetings, I have found what works for me and what doesn't. It's almost like a franchise. Every single instance that you walk into is totally different based on who you're around, geographically where you are, how healthy that meeting is. A lot of meetings are toxic. There are individuals who may be dangerous or unhealthy in any environment, including recovery. So like you're saying, I was very naive and I thought that anyone in AA was working the program to the best of their ability and that we were all healthy, well-adjusted people who had everyone's best interest at heart. And that I had to learn maybe that wasn't the case. But I started going to more women's meetings. I know where I feel comfortable. I know where I feel safe. I know what works for me. And I had to shop meetings for a long time to find my people, online and in regular. But I love how you talk about your transition from online only anonymously to slowly revealing parts of your identity to then sort of easing into, because I think COVID brought in a lot of people who would never have gone into a regular in-person meeting, and they started experimenting with Zoom, and over time got comfortable enough to go walk into a meeting somewhere. And that's cool. Because some people need that time to ease in. When I got sober, I don't remember online meetings really being a thing. Maybe they were, but
I think it's pretty new. I think it's pretty new, and it occurs to me too, my husband's a golfer. So whenever we travel, he goes to a golf course and walks on as a single player. And there's always a group of 3 that has room for a 4th. He always comes away from vacation having made new friends and spent 4 hours with people that are like-minded.
So cool.
Right? People that are religious might go to a church in another community and find a similarity, but you also know that but not everybody in that church is going to be for you just because they go to the same church. And so it's kind of just another way to have common interest. But yeah, isn't it just so comfortable to sit in a room full of people who get it, who they also this week, faced the whole week with this same monkey on their back, surrounded by people who don't know or whatever, like that
Yes.
common experience without even saying it just feels so good.
It does. It really does. Well, thank you for talking us through that, because I really wanted to hear kind of how you found your own support. So the parallels with other programs can't be denied. I feel like, a lot of us are saying the same things in different ways, essentially, that your book and your show and just everything, your blog leaves everything open and flexible, to where people can explore and they can ask questions and they can see what feels comfortable. And then, like you were saying, adjust as you learn more information, then you can make adjustments along the way. And you also go beyond the foundational changes in thinking that have to occur to eliminate alcohol. So when you're talking about some of the things that brought in scaffolding for you, if you will, it's like rituals on page 47, self-talk on page 41, creating comfort zones, and you're very specific about how do we do these things? How do we actually do it? So I like it, again, because it's not this big theoretical idea and then you have to go figure out what that even means for you. This is literally kind of this is how you can do it, having a plan.
I want it to be really practical, really pragmatic, and self-directed.
And having a plan, what to do on a Saturday. And we in AA too, take your own car, let someone know you're there, go with someone sober if you can. Like, there has to be a plan in place, because just to protect yourself from yourself, right? And how to navigate social events where drinking will be happening, exploring creativity, finding more support. So was all this discovered by trial and error for you? Like, is most of what's in the book kind of your personal experience, or it's probably also collected from other people you've talked to? Where does it all come from?
Definitely collected wisdom. I think, on the Bubble Hour, I tried to count. There's 350 episodes, but I think there were so many guests on some of those episodes. Probably there's like close to 1,000 individuals that whose stories I got to hear, and tons of online groups and retreats I've been to, and comments on my blog. So what I was really trying to bring together are the things that I'd commonly heard tripped people up in early sobriety. So how many people have said I've had 1,000-day ones? Well, for me, my 1,000-day ones were, first of all, because every afternoon I found a reason to drink, because I didn't realize that what felt like an urgent reason to drink was me being in withdrawal. So when I wrote about that, right? Like, understand your pattern, know what your day is like, and understand that when you are telling yourself, oh, I have to drink today because this is happening, actually, you're probably in withdrawal and your body is probably demanding alcohol in response to that, because you've conditioned it that that's the cure for feeling that way. So now that you know that, how do you feel about that? And know that when you quit, you are going to feel this way. So now you know that you don't have to experience it yourself, or when you do experience it yourself, you can call it what it is, and you can overcome these little obstacles. So these are all tricks. The thing about creating comfort zones in your house was a guest on the Bubble Hour in one of my first years on that show. And a woman named Erin told this story that I loved about how when she was just a few days sober, she was hosting her entire family for Thanksgiving, which is really big in the US. And she couldn't get out of it because, it was such a long-standing plan that she was going to host all these family members who were all drinkers. But she didn't know when she made that plan that she was going to get sober just days before that. So what she did for herself was she had a walk-in closet, and she built herself a little nest on the floor: pillows, blankets, water bottle, podcasts, magazines, snacks. And she kept excusing herself from her own party to go to her closet and take a time out and just like breathe and just do something nice for herself to get her through these cravings. And she stayed sober through that event by going to this little nest in her closet. And I loved that idea so much. And that I started realizing that, okay, so when I go to a party and I feel overwhelmed, what if I just like say, is it okay if I just go make a phone call in your guest room, and like claim a little bit of real estate for myself? And then I learned from doing that when I host a party, I always make sure there's a quiet place for people to go. I have a family member who is neurodivergent. So if he's coming to a family event at our house, I always make sure when he walks in, I say, hey, just so you know, there's a spot upstairs. If you want to get away from everybody, go to that corner upstairs. That's all set up for you. And you can spend as much time there as you want. And that's something I learned from being sober, from, God bless her, from this Erin lady and her story. So these are all things I've picked up along the way. And the book isn't really so much, you must do all these things to get sober. It's more like flip around and like try incorporating this, try incorporating that, work your way through it, skip anything that feels really disingenuous. But all of it is intended to help you preempt things that typically catch people up, like not having plans on the weekend or feeling hurt when you're left out, or not knowing what to say when someone offers you alcohol. So you just say yes because it comes out of your mouth before you can think about it. Like all of these things are just preemptive. And I've just heard so many stories of people whose best efforts were tripped up by these dumb little moments because they just didn't know. And now you know.
It's so helpful. And I love, my home is my sanctuary. And so this, for me, like a tea ritual at night, I meditate in the morning on a pillow. I burn my incense and my Palo Santo, and I have all these very comforting, but that's like way into my recovery. In the beginning, it was more this practical stuff of, hey, turn out the light in your kitchen at night, and you would light a candle to signify it's closed in there. And now we're going to go move to a different room, or, moving furniture around if that was always the chair that you drink in. Or there's just so many, real life applicable, snuggling a pet. That's definitely one of my favorites, but I really just, the rituals, because drinking is such a ritual. It becomes such a ritual for us and such an automatic response. Yes, I'll take that drink, or someone just hands it to you, and before you know it, you're sipping on it because you don't want to be rude, or you feel uncomfortable. You don't know what else to say. So planning ahead, and then also, to your point, knowing you're going to feel kind of crappy for a little bit. It's just going to be uncomfortable for a little bit, but it's not permanent.
And I think the thing is that drinking becomes the only comfort we think of. If you think that when you quit, every time you want a drink, what you're really asking yourself is for comfort. So if you can invent 10 other comforts to offer yourself, because you've just got blinders on, you've just trained yourself that there's only one thing you want, which is alcohol. So if you can think of other ways to offer comfort, then that you have an arsenal, And ritual sounds kind of religious. And I have to say that I don't mean anything even like, it doesn't have to be religious. My most effective ritual in early sobriety was setting up the coffee pot. So I would go and grind the beans and set up the coffee pot and set the timer. And then I would think like, oh, I'm going to wake up in the morning. I'm going to be one more day sober, and the coffee is going to be waiting for me, And so it would give me something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's just, I love it. Okay. So the interviews you and your team have done over the years have been so diverse and interesting and honest. And I've listened to some of them more than once. And I recently was listening or re-listening maybe to the Michael Blanchard one. I think it was back in 2020. And I literally had to get off the trail with my dogs and go sit under a tree and cry. Because sometimes stories are so visceral. It's just like, oh my what just happened? And his examples of real life addiction and recovery. And there was this explosive moment of gratitude too, of like, I used to have to look for a pill under my car seat too, to be able to get through the workday. And now I'm out here on the beautiful trail and I'm sober and my life is amazing. And it was one of those moments of perspective. And it all came crashing in just from listening to that story. Another was Jenny Dalton, because she was talking about insight around honoring her father's death with grieving, just grieving, and when you were just talking earlier about that craving, sometimes we're just asking to be comforted. And so alcohol is quick and easy and we think it's going to just, but it's not comforting. It's actually covering up whatever it needed to be comforted. Right.
Right. It's numbing.
Yeah. And then later that same thing that needs to be comforted, guess what? It's still going to be there. So have there been, does a guest come to mind that made you emotional or really hit you in the heart because maybe they were going through something that you were going through at the time too?
Yeah. Like almost every guest, I think, pierced my heart in one way or another. But when I look back on them, I remember like really crying during one interview. And for some reason, I can't remember who it was, but I had to actually like pause and collect myself. And I probably edited that out because I really wanted my show to be more about the guest than about me. Which every show is different, but that was something I did. But a lot of things have stood out to me over the year. Yeah, Michael Blanchard was a really great story because he turned to photography and became a photographer who combined essays about recovery with photographs, and his work is stunning. Some little snapshots come to mind too. Like one was I interviewed, she's a recovery coach now, Vanessa Klugman, who was a Chicago doctor who developed an addiction to pain medication after, I believe, dental surgery, and ended up, she told a story about visiting a patient in her home and stealing medication from the patient and being caught by the family and losing her license. And her willingness to tell that story just shook my bones, because I just thought, wow, that was such a painful experience for her, and something that I think is kind of titillating in a way, and we hear about powerful people and fall from grace, but just when we just realize like the honesty that people are willing to share to tell their stories always really moves me. Another one that comes to mind, there's these little moments. One guest named Ingrid told a story about being an overweight kid whose family was always kind of on her about her weight. And she had snuck up into the snack cupboard to get a snack. And when she jumped down off the cupboard, this is awful. She accidentally landed on her dog and broke the dog's leg. And the shame spiral that triggered for her, not only doing something she wasn't supposed to do, injuring, a small animal that everybody loved, but also then the way it connected that trauma to secretly eating and feeling bad about her body and her weight as a little kid. And the way that carried forward in her life, I've never forgot that story. And even telling it to you, I feel it in my body. It just really was heartbreaking. And then one other story that has always stayed with me, and it speaks to the level of denial of the danger that we put ourselves in. An author named Carlin Pipes, who was a very successful competitive swimmer. And her book is called The Do-Over. And she talks about how she would get drunk and then go swim, like train swimming for competition by swimming in the ocean. She was somewhere in California, but she was in an area where like actual shipping containers and boats were coming and going, and she was swimming back and forth in there. And to me, that was like playing hopscotch on the freeway, not only that she did it, but she did it drunk. And she was just in such denial of the danger that she was in. And also, I think probably had kind of a death wish, like didn't have regard for her life or her safety. So some of those stories were just bone chilling. And yet I think every one of us has a moment like that in our life, whether we tell it or not, whether we even acknowledge it. Sometimes it's buried deep and it's really too painful for us to excavate. And we don't need to excavate it if we don't want to. We don't need to trot it out for the world in order for it to have value and meaning. But I just think there's these moments where we get a glimpse of these pivot points in people's lives that are either, they might be something that's gone bad for them or something that's turned them away and gone well. But always these moments of pivot are just so poignant and meaningful, and they've stayed with me. I feel like they kind of are stored in my cells because I got to be part of that person sharing their story.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those. Oh man, it's been fun going back through, but even at the end where you were trying to comb through how many hours of footage and trying to pinpoint, pull highlights from episodes, that just made my head hurt to even think about it. You guys did a great job, and getting the farewell from the hosts and the different people. And I don't know, I thought it was awesome. So I want you to explain, before I ask a specific question about it, will you get into the concept about your new book, Take Good Care? Just sort of like the style of it and what it is.
So when I started writing that book, I thought, I was editing 350 hours of Bubble Hour audio down to like a 10-hour final season, recapping a decade. It was a ton of work, but I thought, okay, I've got 10 great hours, but I'm leaving 340 hours of great content behind too. So I thought, well, maybe I could do a daily devotional kind of book, a daily reading with all of these great moments and things I've learned from guests. But when I started compiling it, I thought, the limitation of a daily reading where it's like, this is what you read on this day, was trying to pick like the exact right reading for that day. And then you have things like holidays that are religious holidays, and how do you acknowledge other religions, or, what do you put on Christmas Day that's going to mean the same thing to someone who celebrates Christmas religiously as someone who doesn't celebrate it at all. Or for someone who's an entirely different faith that, maybe on that day they feel kind of like, oh, this day is always about this thing, So I thought, doing that type of a book, I realized had limitations. And what I really wanted was to spark conversation with the reader. So I set it up so that there's fewer chapters, and but I invite you to revisit them 3 times. So every time you read a little story, which is just a couple pages, the idea is to give you an idea and to spark your response. And so I ask you to mark it off. There's 3 boxes, so tick it off each time you come to it. And at the end, I ask you a question. And I ask you to record your response. So, we might talk about connection. And at the end I say, who are the people who support you in your recovery, or who you look to for support in your recovery? And the thing is that you're going to feel differently 6 months from now than you feel now. Mm-hmm. So when you read that again and write your answer, there's a space to write your answer for each of the 3 times that you visit a chapter. And what I want people to see is how we change over time and how we grow. Sometimes we read something and I think, oh, I don't get it. Like, I don't know, if you read the big book, you might read something in the big book and you're like, I don't know why everybody loves this story. It doesn't mean anything to me. And then suddenly a year from now, you might read it and go like, oh, that blows my mind. Like now it means something. Yes.
Yeah.
But sometimes the opposite happens too, where we read something or we hear something and it really resonates and knocks our socks off. But then we use it to change ourselves. And down the road, we realize, like, I can't even remember why I used to like this so much. Like, this seems kind of basic. And it's good to record that too, because then we realize, not that the thing was never meaningful, but that you have grown so much that this is now just part of how you roll. So it becomes a book that is, it just continues the conversation, and it takes the storytelling of the guests, becomes a conversation between me and the reader, becomes a conversation between the reader and themselves.
And it's so cool because I've never seen anything like this. I have a ton of daily readers. I have regular books. I have all kinds of things, but like it's just a really cool exercise in how we evolve, how we grow, or even on a certain day, if I read something, depending on the weather or my mood or what's going on in my day, maybe my interpretation is completely different just based on those types of my internal weather, and so having this, being asked to revisit something, and a couple of my favorites on page 12, there's one called Being Held. And, talking about creating that space for people, and, allowing other people to hear your innermost thoughts and why that would be helpful in recovery. And I remember I felt very attacked by it, and I felt suspicious. Like I didn't like that in the beginning. And now I do, because I have more trust. I have more trust in myself. And I also, it's weird to watch how these things have changed. And then one of my, I don't know, I can't say I have a favorite because they're all good. And another thing I love about it is that all of this is from your guests.
Yeah.
There's stories that come from snippets of your guests, as well as the other book, Unpickled, where there's quotes and examples and scenarios from all these different people. And you can tell just by their filters and experiences that the way they've interpreted it is just so different. But I love that because you really do make it about your guests. But my favorite one of my favorites is called Pin the Age, and it's on page 24. And my question for you is when the last time you used this technique was, because it prompts you to ask, how old do I feel right now? Right.
Yeah.
When you're having a reaction, you're observing your reaction or your feeling towards something of to pin the age and to kind of help, I guess, put it in perspective around that. Do you ever use that for yourself?
I use it all the time. It's
so brilliant.
Yeah, it's definitely didn't come from me. I kind of see myself as an aggregator,
Right.
And I'm a good communicator. So I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I'm really good at sweeping together concepts and then packaging them in a way that's easy to use for other people.
Right.
So that concept is something that I heard in therapy, but I also heard it at the dinner table at a recovery retreat. And when you are feeling a certain way, when you're feeling like really upset, really emotional, or really uncomfortable with another person, if you just ask yourself, it has to be a gut feeling, like don't overthink it. How old do I feel right now? Like, how old is that voice right now that's telling me, that person is mean or I'm bad or this is yucky? Like sometimes it's coming from a really young place, sometimes it'll help you kind of understand where that wound is coming from. And it always shocks me. Like when I feel that way, when I think I'm feeling really grumpy, like where's this coming from? I can tell right away. I feel 15, I feel 12, I feel 7. And as soon as I do that, I can pinpoint, this is about feeling bullied, or this is about feeling maybe not good about my body. Feeling scared, abandoned, like it can really help you kind of pare back to it. And then what we really, again, it's a call for comfort, right? So when we go and we tend that part of ourselves and we realize that, maybe I'm not actually in danger right now, or maybe I'm not being abandoned right now, but there's a part of my heart that feels like it and that needs some love and needs some comfort. And drinking isn't going to help that part feel better. That's just going to push the pause button, and it's going to come back with a vengeance later. But even just acknowledging it, and it's kind of a warning signal, I guess, that gets internalized and just needs usually a little bit of acknowledgement. So I use it all the time. It's really helpful. And I think anyone that's kind of got a more anxious attachment style, which definitely makes sense for me, is someone who will find this useful, because it's probably going back to something from childhood or another stage that's just reminding you of a time when you were hurt, and you're bracing yourself for it.
Right. And your mind is trying to protect you. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to show up and help you, but it feels physiologically maybe like, or emotionally, or feeling triggered like something's very wrong. And I think in those states, for me, in that state is when I make poor choices. I can make poor choices if I don't have a tool, which is what I love about this, because instantaneously you can check in, ask yourself this question. And the first age that comes to mind, that there's something deep in the recesses of your psyche, probably, that whatever just happened bumped up into. I don't know. When I read it, I was like, oh my God, it's so good. And I remember my sponsor told me one time, like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is this? That was her kind of quick, like, check-in. Like, if I'm about to spin out over something and it's an 11 in my mind, and then I have to ask myself, what is this really, though, in the real world on a scale of 1 to 10, not in Amanda's brain? It's a 2. And it could help me just hold on. But this to me is even more profound, because it ties back to a wound that I may be having a reaction that's more related to that than to what's actually going on. And then you go even further, which is go comfort yourself at that age. Mm-hmm. Go reparent or love on or encourage or whatever you need to. I don't know. That is huge. So thank you. Thank you for that.
I'm glad that's helpful.
It's awesome. I love it. I'm going to tell all my sponsees and everyone I know about it. So on page 124, one of the things you really talk about a lot is to start a gratitude practice. And I love that you incorporate that. I used to think that anything like that was just woo-woo and just like, oh God, gratitude, because again, I'm logical. I like lists and science and stuff like that. But now we have all this science that shows that gratitude, time in nature, these things actually can rewire our minds over time if we're consistent. And so what's your gratitude practice? Like, what do you do every day to stay in a state of gratitude?
Well, it shifts, so what I tell you, I'll tell you what I'm doing right now, but know that if someone's listening 6 months from now, I might be doing something different, because I'm always kind of changing things. But one thing I really like to do, I do a practice called morning pages, which is an idea from a book called The Artist's Way, an older book by Julia Cameron that looks at ways to sort of tend ourselves with creativity. And what it is that you write before you do anything else in the morning. Well, I make a cup of coffee, but like before you read the news or listen to podcasts or talk to people, like before the world gets in, while it's still just you and yourself, which at one time was a place I never, ever wanted to be. Now I start my day from that place. And you write 3 pages it's like just decluttering your brain. I take it a step further and I write 3 pages and then destroy them. So a journal is one thing. Some people want to keep their morning pages because they're using it like a journal. This for me is where I write all the things I feel like I can't say or wouldn't want anyone to hear me say. Like, I'm hurt by so-and-so. I'm annoyed by this. I'm worried about this. I'm ruminating on this dumb thing. Like all of this stuff, I can just get it out. And I used to do it with a pencil and paper and then shred the paper. What I do these days is I do it on my iPad with an Apple Pencil and I write it out, which is so fun, on the iPad. And then I change it to the eraser and I erase it all. So it's the mind-brain process of handwriting, but then also the release of getting it out and deleting it, and then it's gone. And I use that as a way to free myself from the stuff that kind of feels like shouldn't stay in there. It's not good stuff to keep. But I usually end it by saying something I'm grateful for, or something I'm looking forward to that day. So that I'm not just ranting and then purging, but I'm also like transforming it a little bit and then releasing it. And so it's different than just thinking about and like convincing yourself that you're mad. It's a way of actually processing it. And so I think that's why gratitude is so powerful, is that it is a way to process. So we're not just thinking happy thoughts as a way to bypass bad feelings or deny that things maybe need attending. We don't want to do that like toxic positivity and falseness and fakeness. It's not that. That's not really useful. That's just another way to numb. I think gratitude is really about processing. And, there's always a reason to be grateful, even in hard moments. And again, not in that easy way out of being like, well, I've got a terminal disease, but other people have it worse. It's not that. It's you got to go a little bit deeper than that. And sometimes it's a way to bring us in. So I might think, I'm really uneasy right now, but this chair is comfortable,
Right.
And one thing I do every day, I kind of force myself to do this. I'm 55 and things are changing around here, like I'm happy with how I look. I take good care of myself, but honest to God, every time I turn around, there's like a facial hair in the wrong place, or my skin is changing, my body's changing, like just everything's changing, and you can't be too attached to old things, but you still have to like take care of yourself. So as I'm getting in the shower, I force myself to look in the mirror at my body as it is and thank it and say, like, this body has served me well. This imperfect body. And, sometimes even, we all have parts of our body that we don't like. For me, it's kind of hips, thighs, stomach, like all the parts that are really changing right now. To touch them, like put my hands on my hips and say, like, thank you for holding me up, thank you. And so giving gratitude to my body in a really realistic way. And just like remembering, like, yeah, you know what? Like this body has been really good to me. And I'm still going, I'm still here. And just these little things that we can do. Again, we're coming back into the moment. We're coming back into the reality of where we are. Gratitude is a really good way to do that.
I love that. I love all of those things so much. And just in a lot of meditations, they'll ask you to thank your body, thank your legs, and thank your heart for pumping all the blood, and just what an incredible thing and how much support. So that's a really great reminder, especially, I don't even want to say especially for women, because I think it's probably for all people. But that's a very cool way to love yourself and be grateful. So can you walk us through a time when you had to grieve without alcohol?
There's been a few. I've talked and written a lot about my dad's death, and I know you've gone through this recently too. It was a very hard time.
It's about to come up on the anniversary of his death, right?
Yeah. A week from this next week. Yeah, this next week. And I don't think a lot about anniversaries. I know some people really like experience profound grief on the anniversary of the day. I find that I carry it with me all the time. So even though I looked at the calendar as I was kind of writing out my week and thinking, oh gosh, this is the 11th was the day of his funeral. I remember because it was his birthday. But this kind of seasonally, I guess it occurs to me, and oh gosh, I don't want to do another 3 hours on this for you, Let me see if I can be succinct in saying how being alcohol free served me well. It was a very difficult time for me. For losing a parent's hard for everybody, and we're probably all going to have to do it. And it's complicated in its own way for everybody. So it was tough for me because in my particular circumstance, I think I was hoping for maybe an acknowledgement or an apology. I had some unfinished business with my dad, and he had Parkinson's disease. And towards the end, that came along with some dementia, delirium. And that meant that if he had wanted to have that conversation with me that I so desperately wished we could have had, he really wasn't able to have it anyway. And so I not only had to grieve losing the parent, but I was also grieving losing the dream, hope, expectation that I might get some closure on this particular area of pain. And alcohol would have taken the edge off that pain, but it wouldn't have lessened it. It would have just stored it up. So I feel like I showed up authentically through every step of that hard journey. And I was able to be there for him and for my mom and for my sisters and do my part and play my role, because we all kind of helped each other through that. But I was also able to be there for myself. And I felt it all in real time. And I moved through it, I believe, more efficiently because I wasn't constantly numbing out and abandoning the process by using alcohol to stop what I was feeling. So I feel like it served me very well. And this is what Glennon Doyle calls brutal, like the brutal truth of recovery, meaning beautiful, but also brutal, is that when we stop numbing our bad feelings, yeah, we do feel them. We have to do the hard stuff unnumb. But we also stop numbing the good feelings.
Yeah.
So I had the two things in balance. Yes, I was feeling the pain of grief more, but I also was sober so that I could feel the good things more, and I could feel the healing more, and I could move through it all more. And I feel like I'm not special in that way. I'm not smarter than anybody else. This is just how humans respond to sobriety and recovery. So for me, grief is real and raw and profound, and it's not over. 6 years later, I still feel grief, but also I feel the healing. I'm grieving from a different place than where you're grieving from right now, having more recently lost your dad. And we don't need to rush that, but we need to keep feeling if we're going to move on and grow. And so here's the thing. For the longest time when I was out for walks and my dad would come to mind, I would actually swear at him and say, "Get the F away from me right now. I don't want to think about you. I'm enjoying my walk. You don't get to come on this walk with me. I'm still mad at you." And I get to still be mad. And then at some point, I could say, "Okay, you get 5 minutes. I'm going to listen to you." And so I don't think that I don't have a belief system that makes me feel like he's with me and this is an actual conversation. To me, this is healing that's taking place in my mind and my heart. But some people, their belief system might be that is a real conversation. So respectfully, for whatever people believe, I think it allows me to show up in that relationship. And so even though I didn't get what I wanted in terms of healing that relationship before he died, I have had some healing and expect it to continue to heal. I have room, I have capacity for continued healing. And to me, that's one more reason to stay sober, is so that we can keep growing and healing in this way. So I hope that gives a message of hope to you and to anybody who's feeling pain, whether it's grief or from other sources. Because we move through.
And that's beautiful. And I'm so glad that you were able to show up for your family and for yourself. That's amazing. And also that you're getting to move through it. Because if we were drinking during this, all we would be doing is just staying right there. And so if 12 years could go by and then you get to feel it, guess what? You get to start back at the beginning, but you're actually getting to move through it and heal faster, because the pain demands to be felt, right? It's inevitable. It's coming. And
it morphs. Yeah. If you don't feel it, it'll pop up somewhere else. You said whack-a-mole earlier, right? So it does. Like, it's so funny. Our brains have a way of being heard one way or another.
So on that note, how did becoming alcohol-free change your parenting?
Well, my kids were all teenagers and above when I quit drinking, and my oldest had just gotten married. And I think that might have been one of the big catalysts for quitting, was because I thought, oh my gosh, he's married now. If they have a baby, I can't babysit it. I'm drunk all the time. Like, even if nobody knows, I know I cannot babysit a child and drink the way I'm drinking. Like, I hate the fact that a child would get in the way of the alcohol that I need to be me, and also if they found out how much I drank while I was babysitting, they would be really upset. So I thought, this is a reason for me to be sober so I can show up for my family. And then my kids they were all like, the youngest was 14 and then 16 or 17, 18, 19. So my oldest got married quite young, but he's still married. So that worked out good.
That's good.
So I have 3 boys. We have 3 boys. And so they were older teenagers at the time. So in some ways, it was really good, because it's a time when, as a mom, your relationship is always kind of changing, but I was really kind of trying to find my place in their life at that time. And I think it's just allowed me to kind of be really present for them and really mindful of the kind of relationship I want to have with them. And they're all married now. And I feel like I feel really good about my role in the family, and not that I'm perfect, and not that everybody has to bow at my feet and listen to me as I, offer them wisdom, but that I can just be really intentional and kind and wise and humble. And thank God I got over this idea that I always needed to be right. That is really not great. Adult parent-child relationships, if you can get yourself over that. So I feel like I really love my role in our family as kind of the matriarch. And I have a really beautiful respect and relationship with my daughter-in-laws and with my sons. And I'm very intentional, I think, about how I approach things. And, just yesterday, I was with my son and his wife, and this particular son and his wife, they're both 28, 29. And I overstepped a little because I reacted emotionally to something. And right away I was able to say, hey, you guys, thanks for being patient with me when my emotions are faster than my brain. I was a little quick to say XYZ, but I appreciate your patience with me, and I really want to get this right. And I think that goes a long way. I could not have done that when I was drinking. I just did not have not only the self-awareness, but I feel like I was quite rigid and brittle and scared all the time. And anytime I made a mistake, I wasn't sure if it was because of alcohol. So I would defend and hide and protect my mistakes because I was scared that it would reveal my reliance on alcohol. So now I know if I make a mistake, it's just a mistake. And it's not a big deal. Or if it is a big deal, then I can attend to it. But I don't have all this other garbage around it because that's really messy.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. It's so practical. This is like everything that you write and put out into the world. It's just so practical, anecdotal, real world examples of that self-awareness and knowing that we're just people, right? You don't have to hide behind alcohol or that's why I made mistakes or whatever. It's just like, no, that's just being human, and your honesty about that. Okay. Final question. Please tell us about Tiny Bubbles.
Okay.
Because I was so sad when I heard the bubble hours going away. I was like, oh my God, what? No, why? Where's she? What's she going to do? What's going to happen? And then I heard Tiny Bubbles. I was like, okay, thank God. So please tell us about it. What's the story? What's going on? Where can we find it? All the good stuff.
So, I wanted to end the bubble hour on a high note.
Yeah.
I wanted to end it while it was still good and while I felt good about doing it. And I just kind of felt like it had run its course. It was good. I was losing kind of energy for it. So I was kind of ready to move on. But I, again, felt like, gosh, I have all of these great hours and hours of material and all of these like snippets of things. And they kind of come full circle, like there'll be like a news story from today that about, I don't know, like last month it was, I'm in Canada and our government here announced that they were looking at putting warning labels on alcohol and that 2 drinks a week is the, healthy drinking guidelines, but none is better. That was a big news story. That was a big splash, warning labels on alcohol. And I thought, I want to be able to take older bits of conversations that still resonate and weave them in with like news bits from today or new books that are coming out. So Tiny Bubbles is a 15-minute version of the Bubble Hour where I talk about something that's happening today and then pull a couple of clips from past interviews, just like, kind of the best bits of the Bubble Hour. And we just don't always have an hour to listen to things. So sometimes you're just driving to work and you're like, oh, I've got this happening today. And I need a little boost of encouragement. So this was the idea, was that I could just make short, quick episodes, quick for me to make, because as you know, doing a regular podcast is a boatload of work. Listeners, if you're listening to an hour podcast that's done weekly, like that person you're listening to has worked a lot more than an hour to make that podcast. They worked several hours or more. So this is just like a little more efficient for me to make. So I thought, I've left up the archives. There's hundreds of hours of Bubble Hour stuff to listen to, but this is just like a fresh little remix. And so just they're 15 minutes or less. And it's just like a little burst. And it's wherever you get podcasts. So it's on all the usual places. So just search Tiny Bubbles and you'll find it. You can go to thebubblehour.com. I've got links there too. But it's a way for me to kind of keep my hand in and kind of keep connected with listeners and keep the conversation going, but at a pace that feels sustainable for me at this point in my life now.
Right. That's amazing. I'm glad you didn't kind of exit the scene completely, because I know how important you are and your work is to so many people. But I want to thank you again for joining and for being willing to talk about all these things. And it's been enlightening. And I feel so lucky. Like I cannot believe it, and you're so calming. You have such a calming presence and such a practical application of the things that you've learned and things that have worked for you. And I would like to close this out. By the way, I will put all the links for, the blog, and you can get all of the Jean's books on Amazon. So I'll put those links in as well. You're on Instagram at The Bubble Hour. Is that where Tiny Bubbles lives too? Or does Tiny Bubbles have its own handle?
I didn't make a separate Instagram for Tiny Bubbles.
That's what I thought. It's all the same. It's all together. Yeah. Okay. So it's the bubble there. So I wanted to just close this out. Go ahead.
Oh, I thought Tiny Bubbles Instagram. There's only so many handles we need.
I literally just started an Instagram page the other day for the podcast, and I'm like, what? Another thing to learn. It's a lot. So I wanted to read your poem called The Pivot, and it's on page 137 in Unpickled, but is it also in the Ember Ever There? I would assume, since
No, I wrote it after that.
Okay,
I wrote it after that. So I included it here. Yeah.
Okay. So it says, The Pivot. Set it down. It doesn't serve you. Your arms are aching, cramped and sore. You're so accustomed to this burden, believing less will hurt you more. Your true purpose is long forgotten, enmeshed unwilling to a bitter call. In fearing death or certain ruin, you've reached the point of stand or fall. This is your day. This is your moment. This is your life. This is your heart. Take back your freedom. Reclaim your strength. It's time to quit. It's time to start. I barely made it through. I'm sorry. I practiced this without crying several times, and I was like, you're never going to do it. That's beautiful.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Goosebumps. It still gives me goosebumps. That is a precious moment, the moment we make that pivot. And I honor all of us that are walking in it, but I also honor your listeners that have yet to get there. Sometimes I think people listen to recovery podcasts feeling like ashamed that they're still struggling. Mm-hmm. And I just want to send love to that person or those people, because you're not alone. That moment awaits you, and it's a glorious moment when we make that pivot and turn things around.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.